I ran across this cartoon recently on Reddit, and it really got me thinking. I remember as a kid riding around in the car with my parents in the 90s with, in a summer night, the bugs would absolutely just wind up plastered on the windshield, like this picture from 1990. Here in 2020, or in the 2020s rather, 2025, I've been driving for years, and I realized that I rarely wind up with that situation with a lot of bugs on my windshield. Maybe a few here and there, and I notice them when they do because I'm not used to it anymore. I also remember the front grille of the car would always have just like big and small bugs, just like absolutely encrusted. This is hardly a rigorous take by itself. I live in a different part of the country than I did when I was younger, and I also live in more of a suburban or urban environment, whereas I used to live in a country environment. It's quite possible that if I were to go driving around my hometown a summer evening, that it would end up looking like this. But as I read through online, it seemed that a lot of people have similar anecdotes. And someone I remember was mentioning that, they always used to drive through the same part of Oklahoma to get from, their house to their grandparents' house. And they were doing the trip again after many years. And they realized, thinking about this, that sound of like almost rain on the windshield was gone. So it got me wondering, is this part of an actual trend? So I started looking and I found some interesting papers about it. I thought I'd share just my very, very brief literature review on the topic with you. A lot of the papers and articles that I found stem back to this paper from 2017 in Science. It's called "Where Have All the Insects Gone? Surveys in German Nature Reserves Point to a Dramatic Decline in Insect Biomass." Entomologists call it the windshield phenomenon. If you talk to people, they have a gut feeling. They remember how insects used to smash on your windscreen. Today, drivers spend less time scraping and scrubbing. "I'm a very data-driven person," says Scott Black, executive director of the Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation in Portland, Oregon. But it is a visceral reaction when you realize you don't see that mess anymore. It's interesting the memories that are coming back, not only of the bugs on the windshield, but I remember going outside. I lived in the country in upstate New York, and I remember going outside one day and seeing thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of dragonflies flying everywhere and hunting mosquitoes and things like that. I think that's what they do. I think they hunt mosquitoes. I could be wrong about that. And I just have not seen that kind of thing as often, just that absolute, like, absurd density of insect biomass. But as the paper observes, observations about splattered bugs aren't scientific. They could be scientific, by the way. They're not scientific because, we haven't been, writing down like the number of insects on a clipboard, but it could be scientific. You could do a scientific study of splattered bugs on windshields if you had started early enough. But the point is that few reliable data exist on the fate of important insect species. I think this one's really funny. Scientists have tracked alarming declines in domesticated honeybees, monarch butterflies, and lightning bugs. But few have paid attention to the moths, hoverflies, beetles, and countless other insects. We have a pretty good track record of ignoring most non-charismatic species, which most insects are. And I think that's a really good point. It's like, would you be terribly upset if I told you that the slug population was declining? Probably not. Most of the good data in this paper focuses around insect traps. And fortunately, this entomological society in Germany has been putting out insect traps and measuring since 1989. And what they found between 1989 and 2013 is that the total mass of their catch had fallen by nearly 80%. You can see here, this figure is the mass of insects collected by monitoring traps in the Oerbrecher Brush Nature Reserve in northwest Germany dropped by 78% in 24 years. You can see that it has the grams collected in these insect traps, which is kind of gross, by the way. I imagine that like all the insects are squirming around and you're trying to weigh it. I don't really know how that works. But you can see that across May, June, July, August, September, October, there's, if you look at the yellow line is 1989 and the green line is 2013, there's a really, really drastic reduction. Now, again, we're plagued by incomplete data. The members of the Entomological Society monitored each site only once every few years, but they set up identical insect traps in the same place each time to ensure clean comparisons, which shows a remarkable amount of foresight. The funny thing is that there's probably things that we should be measuring now, but we don't know that we need to measure because it's not going to be a problem. So I really admire hobbyists for, the hobbyists here for having this kind of foresight, and it's probably just drawn from their interest. They're entomological hobbyists, some of these people, and some of them are scientists. But the idea that they just happen to have been measuring this stuff since 1989, I don't think anybody was asking them to do that. Now, what could be going into this? The article says that changes in land use surrounding the reserves are probably playing a role. We've lost huge amounts of habitat, which has certainly contributed to all these declines. If we turn all the semi-natural habitats to wheat and cornfields, then there will be virtually no life in those fields. As fields expand and hedgerows disappear, the isolated islands of habitat left can support fewer species. Increased fertilizer use on the remaining grazing lands favors grasses over the diverse wildflowers that many insects prefer. And when development replaces countryside, streets and buildings generate light pollution that leads nocturnal insects astray and interrupts their mating. In several papers that I found focused on this other aspect, they say neonicotinoid pesticides, already implicated in the widespread crash of bee populations, are another prime suspect. Neonicotinoids are a class of neuroactive insecticides chemically similar to nicotine, developed by scientists at Shell and Bayer in the 1980s. And here's the issue. Because they affect the central nervous system of insects, neonicotinoids kill or deleteriously affect a wide variety of both target and non-target insects. Now, it looks like some of them have been banned, but these are very much still at large as an overall class. A meta-study on this topic was published in 2019. It's called Worldwide Decline of the Entomofauna, a review of its drivers. In this paper, they compiled all long-term insect surveys conducted over the past 40 years. Habitat loss by conversion to intensive agriculture is the main driver of the declines. Agrochemical pollutants, invasive species, and climate change are additional causes. Overall, they found that almost half of the species are rapidly declining and a third are being threatened with extinction. So this really does seem to be a real thing. The windshield phenomenon is not just, it's not just in my head or in other people's heads. It really is happening, and that's pretty upsetting. The paper from 2017 goes on to talk about the ripple effects of the reduction in insect biomass. They say that across North America and Europe, species of birds that eat flying insects such as larks, swallows, and swifts are in steep decline. Habitat loss certainly plays a role, but the obvious factor that ties them all together is their diet. They're getting this partly from what they call a rare ecological treasure, decades worth of stratified bird droppings. These come from disused chimneys across Canada in which chimney swifts, which is a type of bird, have built their nests for generations. From the droppings, he and his colleagues can reconstruct the diets of the birds, which eat almost exclusively insects caught in the wing. So they basically have these old chimneys they found that have stratified just absolutely like layers and layers of bird droppings, and then archaeologists or entomologists have found this and gone through and taken layers, kind of like a geologist looks at the layers of a rock, and then they're checking out the composition of the droppings from different decades. It's crazy. That's a very unusual source of data in my mind. The layers revealed a striking change in the birds' diets in the 1940s, around the time DDT was introduced, which of course is a famous pesticide from, I think, that first ecological siren cry or alarm bell, which was, I think, Silent Spring is the name of the book. So with DDT, the proportion of beetle remains dropped off, suggesting the birds were eating smaller insects and getting fewer calories per catch. The proportion of beetle parts increased slightly again after DDT was banned in the 1970s, but never reached its earlier levels. The lack of direct data on insect populations is frustrating. It's all correlative. We know that insect populations could have changed to create the population decline we have now, but we don't have the data, and we never will because we can't go back in time. And that's really the crux of the matter. In many of these things that involve ascertaining the impact of human activities or the, let's say, the negative risk of new technologies in general, people are going to say things like, there's no evidence that this is the case, or there's very little evidence that this is the case. And, the fact is, of course, there's no evidence because, we didn't realize it was a problem until the problem was in full swing. So nobody was studying these things. And one of the big themes for my channel, I would say, and if you, as a viewer, someone who's thinking about science, someone who is making decisions about, what sort of policies to support in your elected officials, what sort of causes to get involved with, if I could give you like one theme, it's the idea of burden of proof. Where does the burden of proof lie? If we're developing a new pesticide for use and we suspect that it has a, potential cascading effect in the environment, affecting insects, we shouldn't, as the critics, we shouldn't have to prove that it's definitely harmful. The people introducing it should have to prove that it's definitely not harmful. And that's the burden of proof argument. So going back to that original cartoon, you see in 1990, this guy is upset because there's bugs all over his windshield. And I remember it was disgusting. I remember, sometimes watching my dad's car, and that was like one of my chores was to try to like get the bugs out of the grill of the front of the car. It was really nasty. Now in 2020, there's hardly any bugs, and that's pretty great. So you see this guy's pretty happy. And of course, in 2050, there's nobody in the car, the implication being that humanity has gone extinct. I think this is hyperbolic or hyperbole. I don't think it's going to happen, but it's not good. Well, anyway, here's another cheerful video from me. I hope you found this interesting or useful in some way. And if you did, please go ahead and like, subscribe, share, and I hope to catch you again soon. Bye.